And so what they end up doing in that court is they actually flip it around.
Yeah.
And Peter's like, actually, you guys are the ones who are on trial.
Right.
You guys are the ones who are in danger of judgment because of who you have crucified. Well, you guys tell me, should I obey God or should I obey you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, now this whole attitude that Peter has, that John has, that's the way that we should carry ourselves.
Hi, I'm Brandon Briscoe, and welcome to another episode of The Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series devoted to interviewing pastors and professors from LFBI and across the Living Faith Fellowship. Today, I have the benefit and the privilege of hanging out with my friend, Pastor Brian Clark. Brian is one of our instructors here at the Bible Institute. He teaches the Hebrews class, but he also teaches a class on evangelism. And today we're going to have a conversation about evangelism and his forthcoming book, but also just talk about missions and church planting and that business, which is all business that he's into and interested in and involved with. So with that, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. It's so good to be here. Oh man, I've been looking forward to this.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, well, because we've been like packing up our house and trying to move over here for we're going to be here for the next 18 months. So we've been we had to like sell everything, get rid of everything, or the little bit that we kept fit into like 60 square feet of storage facility. Our whole life for the last 20 years is in 60 square feet. And the whole time, I'm looking forward to this moment.
Me too. First of all, because I love you and I love spending time with you. I'm also really excited about this season that you're going to be in because we get to benefit from your presence. And so I want to share with the listeners what you're doing in the States and make sense of everything we just talked about, give them insight into what's going on. Tell our listeners, a lot of people that are listening maybe haven't heard our other episodes together. Tell us, who is Brian Clark? and what he's been up to the last 20 years. Okay, man. So what have you been doing in London? And tell our listeners a little bit about your ministry and family, and then we'll talk about the furlough and how you're here.
Okay. Well, could I ask you first, do a little shout out to the church in London because they watch your show.
Oh, wow.
They love your show.
Yeah, please do. I mean, say whatever you need.
To say.
Want me?
They watch to see you. They don't watch to see me.
That's not true.
No, it is true. Yeah, they watch.
What do you want me to say?
Yeah, just say hello to Crossroads in London, or I don't know. I can't.
Okay, I'll say this. So I've known Brian for probably 25 years now. I remember when you went to London. I remember I had just come into the ministry that you were involved with at the time. And I was kind of there. Yeah, I was kind of just coming into Checkpoint as you were leaving.
I remember that.
And for a long time, I've been burdened for the work in London. It's been on our heart. It's been a consistent prayer that God would bless that work for 25 years. And so to me, hearing and knowing that the work is healthy, that there are people there that are growing in the Lord, following Christ, desire to do the work of the mission is an incredible blessing. And so when I say I love Crossroads, I mean it in the most serious way, and I do care for the people that I've never even met. A lot of them I've never met or even engaged with, but we do love you, and the churches in the fellowship that stand by your side, they care for you greatly, and we're expecting that God's going to use you mightily. So shout out to Crossroads.
That's awesome. I mean, all this energy I have can quickly turn into tears. Okay, so please try to refrain.
It's been a while since I've cried on the show, so let's just avoid that if possible.
But they do watch the show. They do like the show. Yeah, and we have been living in London for we started there in 2000. So. But we had like a 2-year period where we came back and raised money to go there permanently. So, I mean, it's about 21 years, I guess, in total that we've been living there. And we planted a church, and Paul Waller and his wife, Emma, he's the pastor of the church. I trained him, and so he took that over. And we could not be happier. because I mean, it was rough. You know, it was rough going trying to get this church started. I mean, I think we started it like 3 times, and it was really tough. But God took us there really for Paul and his wife Emma. Emma was like the icing on the cake, because Paul was like the most perfect guy that, you know, he was just a godsend, total answer to prayer, and then his wife Emma, she's just a peach. She's just a fantastic lady, and so she was, to have a great wife that is godly, who just is focused on the mission, wants to serve, kind of whatever kind of person, man, you could not ask for anybody better. And so the fact that they're pastoring the church, and it got to the point, we transitioned really slow when we trained them and moved them into that position. I did that on purpose because I just didn't want there to be any kind of upset to the church, and or upset to Paul and Emma's life.
Sure.
And so we transitioned really slow. And so like by the end, like, they didn't need me at all anymore. And I thought, man, maybe I've done this a little too good. Because by the end, I'm like, yeah, I'm leaving. And they're like, all right, catch you later. No, they weren't exactly like that. But I'm just saying, by the end of it, I really worked myself out of a job.
Perfect.
And so Paul was, over everything. And literally at the end, the only thing I did was like I worked some of the slides on Sunday, pressing the button for the slides. Yeah,
back to the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do, and in the church, that is. And so it was just it was a real joyous moment for me.
Well, we're excited about it and what it means for your future work as well. So let's maybe just talk about, you're on what we call furlough, which is kind of an interesting term. Maybe in your words, explain what that means and why it's important to stage your life for the next thing to come.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful for our listeners.
It's kind of a misleading term.
Yeah.
Because, furlough is something that like soldiers would take, I guess, to go and rest and recover. Yeah. And, people in other work, other careers would take like sabbaticals or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it implies rest, but it's actually, it's going to be an incredible amount of work, and we're going to have to travel to the 4 corners of the United States and visiting churches. And the reason why we're doing that is because the last 20 years that we've been working toward Crossroads becoming a reality, there's been people behind us praying for us, supporting us, coming over to visit, sending teams, and all this kind of stuff. And so faithfully that I feel personally like they deserve for me to be able to stand there face to face and say thank you.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want to do. I want to go and I want to look at them and tell them how much we appreciate them, and to tell them that it's done. Like, you sent us over there to start a church, to plant a local indigenous church that is self-supporting, self-governing, self-propagating, and
discipleship-oriented, missions-oriented,
expository preaching, soul winning, and it's done. And so now there's a church there where there wasn't one before. And I want to tell everybody, thank you so much for sticking with us.
Right.
And
you referred to it as your celebration tour.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it is, because we do want to celebrate with each of these churches what God has done. And I kind of take that from what Paul did. Whenever he finished up with his journey, and it says he came back to Antioch and he rehearsed all the things that the Lord had done.
Right.
And that's really what I want to do. I want to rehearse with everybody what the Lord's done and to celebrate with them. And because it's remarkable. The fact that it actually finally was accomplished. We have no idea what the future holds, but the fact that it was accomplished is just a miracle. Yeah. And it's only because of the people who supported us and prayed for us. And I can't wait to, I'm going to be hugging a lot of people. A lot of high fives, a lot of hugs.
And people who you probably don't see that often, but have been supporting you behind the scenes, and you've been giving updates too. And they haven't seen you for a while, but they've committed and invested a lot. Just to see this happen, and you get to give an account and say, hey, look at what God's done. How awesome is He?
Right. I just I want to show them that their prayers were not in vain.
Yeah.
And we're just so happy that the first one is done.
Yeah.
And in a way, for Crossroads, this is just the beginning for them. But now, after we come back and we get to celebrate with everybody what the Lord's done, and then we're going to go back. We're going to be here for 18 months, and it's going to take us about that long to accomplish the tour. And then after that, we're going to go back and we're going to start the second one.
Yeah. So explain that vision a little bit. This was always the idea.
Oh yeah.
Was that it would be multiple church plants. And so explain to us the vision that you'll be casting, because you'll be celebrating, but at the same time you'll be saying, don't stop supporting. We need more support than ever, because we're doing this over again. We're hitting replay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, please don't stop. We're going to go back and we're going to do it again. And we had a 2020 vision, which was the vision for Crossroads. And that got postponed a little bit when the whole world shut down with COVID.
Sure.
But now God has given us a 2030 vision. And so we think this year and a half that we'll spend on the celebration tour, going around telling everyone what the Lord has done, also raising more support. Because we haven't actually really raised our support level for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Cost of living has gone way up.
Right.
And so we have to raise a little bit more support. But so we're going to do that for the next year and a half. And then when we get over there, it'll take a little bit. We're going to go back to Crossroads because we want Crossroads to be involved in this next church plant.
Yeah, they'll be sending you out.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And we want them to be involved, with seeing it come to pass. Me and Paul will probably work together for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
I see him, he's like my son in the Lord, and we'll probably be working together forever.
Yeah.
If I have my way, whatever the Lord wants. But so we'll go back there, we'll reestablish ourselves with them, and then we'll get sent out to start another church. And so we're on a 5-year plan to get the next church done.
Okay.
That's a big prayer.
Yeah.
And we really need everyone to pray for 3 things. One is that we raise the necessary support we need. Number 2, that God provides us with a building when we get there, and that God provides us with a man. Now, these are some of the important lessons we've learned over the last 15, 16 years, is that if we can have a man like Paul that was just called.
Yeah, a key man.
Wasn't it? With him, it was I never talked him into going to the ministry. He came into our church. I started discipling him like I've discipled other guys. And he's the one that came to me and was like, I think God's calling me into the ministry. And I tried to talk him out of it, because I was like, just like the guys always told me, if you can do something else, do that.
Right.
And because I was always taught, if you can talk someone out of it, then they're not called.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so I did that. I really tried to talk him out of it. And he was convinced the Lord was calling him. I never tried to talk him into being in the ministry or nothing. And he was called by God to do that. And that's really what you need. You need someone that has a call on their life that is completely separate from me. They just feel like this is what God wants them to do. And if you have that, then they can survive just about anything. And so we need another man like that. And if you have a man like that and you have a place to meet, then the infrastructure that we have created over the last 15 years, that's still in place. We can put that in place, and then the rest of it is really degrees of growth. So we really need a place to meet, and we need a man that I can train. And if we have that, then I'm convinced that we could get another church up and running in 5 years. And that's what I would love to see happen.
Yeah. Well,
now that could change.
Sure. but why not pray for it?
But yes, but pray for those 3 things. 2030 vision.
God's done more with less, right? So
absolutely.
Man, that's cool.
I can't wait to get back and get started, to be honest.
Right.
I'm going to enjoy the heck out of this tour. This is going to be so much fun. But I can't wait to get back and actually get that rolling. It's going to be
the
great.
work of the ministry is fun, isn't it?
It is fun.
It's incredibly challenging and difficult, but it's fun. you help us in the Bible school. That's one of the things that you do, and we're really thankful for that. We're offering the Hebrews class this summer. Students always say great things. In fact, probably one of the most popular classes we offer in the school is the evangelism class that you teach. And so, evangelism has become, a really important thing that you've learned about over the years. And it's evolved and changed because you've kind of gone through all of the different methodologies, and you've tried many different things over time, but you've gleaned a lot of really important truths about what it means to share the gospel with people in your time in London.
Yeah.
And you share that with us in the class. I mean, I think it's really beneficial for people to hear. So that's one of the things that we want people to get is that 8-week course on evangelism. But you've also been in the process of writing a book for quite some time. Can you tell us a little bit about the book that's hopefully going to come out soon?
Yeah, that's what we're praying for.
We're working on it.
Yeah, that was the thing that as soon as I hit the ground in London, that became so apparent. Was that if anything was going to happen, I was going to have to go, because it was just me and my wife, in our house. So we started in our living room. And so if anything was going to happen, I was going to have to go out. I was going to have to lead someone to Christ.
Yeah.
Because there was nothing. I mean, when you're a church planter, in like a forward area like that, you're creating something out of nothing. So there is nothing. There's no infrastructure. There's no ministry to show up for. There's no praise team.
Right.
I mean, there's no building. And so, it's just you and your wife hanging out, having coffee.
Right.
And you have to go and create something. And the only way that happens is if you lead someone to Christ. I had a young man came to me in London, and he was getting ready to plant churches, and he was asking for advice. And he was getting ready to take over a church that was struggling, and he was going to turn that into something. And I told him, I said, that's great. That's a great way to do it. I think you should do that and go for it. I was all for him, behind him. I said, you just have to remember that, when you go in, you put the fresh coat of paint on, you get the praise team going, and you put up the website, and everybody's got the T-shirts and we've got our T-shirts now and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so everyone's got the T-shirt, and you've got your 3-part series that you're getting ready to put out. When all of that is done, just remember that you haven't actually accomplished anything yet, and he looked at me strange, because there was a few people that were still left in the church. So he's got a little bit of a crowd, and he's doing this. And so it's easy to think that, because you're having church but the only way that we ever really move the needle, that's the only way that we ever gain any ground, is if we win someone who is lost to Christ.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, all we're doing is really just moving people around.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And you go to any big city and you see that. Every church gets their turn to be the big church in a particular area. And you take turns, and people move around.
Yeah, that's true everywhere.
Yeah,
and I suppose everywhere in the world where churches exist.
It happens, and I'm not even necessarily against it or for it. It's a natural thing. It happens, but that's irrelevant.
It's not the game plan.
No, it's not. We just have to stay focused, because we can be fooled when it's our turn. To get the influx of people, we can be fooled that we're doing something. But if we're not winning lost people to Christ, then what are we doing?
Right. So
that was very obvious to me as soon as we were there, and I was like, man, how am I going to do that? And I did not know at the time, but God was getting ready to take me through a lot of stuff that He was going to teach me some hard lessons, and that's really how this book was written. It was over many years of many difficult lessons that I learned. That shaped me, and that was always God's plan. He was going to turn me into a soul winner, and that's what I am now, because of Him. Yeah, and He has turned me into a soul winner, and which is true to Matthew 4:19. that is what he wants all of us to be. If you're following Jesus, then you are going to be a fisher of men. We have a little saying in our church that if you're not fishing, then you're not following. Because if you're following Christ, then that is what he will turn you into.
Right. Yeah.
So through all of those hard lessons that we learned, and they were hard, but man, experience is a brutal teacher, but you really do learn.
Yeah.
And so we learned those lessons, but they were just some of the best lessons that I could have learned. And so I tried to get them down on paper, because through the years, we've developed a process where we can take anybody, it doesn't matter your experience or your Bible knowledge, and we can show them and enable them to be a soul winner. And that's what I really want for each and every believer. I mean, if you can only imagine if each believer was equipped to be a soul winner.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for a lot of our churches and our fellowship, a lot of the people listening are coming from a heritage of discipleship, and discipleship is a critical component to their ministry. But we often forget, we you know, there's like a in a lot of our churches, we have a long list of potential disciplers. The shorter list is a list of new disciples. It's a short list. Well, the reason it's short is because we're not producing evangelists. Well, you know, one of the 4 goals that we often say of discipleship is that the person would be integrated into ministry, that they would be established in ministry. I think a lot of people interpret that as working in children's ministry or opening doors, being hospitable. But the truth is, the work of the ministry, as Christ taught it, was primarily the work of evangelism. It was the work of a fisherman.
Absolutely. I think discipleship as a primary should be creating fishers of men. Yeah. It should be creating soul winners. And it should be, I mean, if we think of in the broad sense, it should be creating disciple makers. That's what discipleship should be. It's an apprenticeship in disciple making. Yeah. But of course, disciple making always has to begin with soul winning. Right. And it's not to say that they shouldn't be in the kids ministry or putting out chairs or making
the work
coffee.
Of edification belongs to all of us.
I mean, obviously, you know, the work of the ministry can include and should include serving the body and all that. But you're right. We have to keep at the forefront that we need to be soul winners. And that's what, when you make a disciple who is a disciple maker, they should know automatically that has to include me winning someone to Christ. And maybe, you know, you're not going to have a lot of what you might call results in that, but you should be always out there fishing, you know. Right.
And so the book is called, or will be called, Just A.S.K. Can you explain the title to us a little bit, and tell us what that A.S.K is an acronym? What does that stand for?
Yeah, the acronym is, well, it's kind of 2 things. The title is Just A.S.K is 2 things. One, it's a reminder, because one of the things that we learned is that there is a huge misconception when it comes to being a soul winner. There is a huge misconception out there that really fights against us as fishers of men. And that is, we tend to think that nobody's interested.
Right.
When you know, look on Instagram or the media and stuff like that, it kind of seems that there's a real antagonism against God and Christianity, and that's true. There is.
Yeah. But it's cultural.
In the large scale, there certainly is. I mean, obviously, you know, Christ said, you know, if they hate you, it's because they hated me first, and there is an antagonism that is real. But when you deal with individuals, you know, one-on-one, you find something very different. There are a lot of people out there who really want to know.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are interested. And so as Christians, we tend to carry ourselves like the nerd in high school who's trying to ask out the good-looking girl. And we're
gee whiz.
Yeah. Whoa. I mean, we're witnessing, like, you know, I know there's no way in the world you would ever be interested in this, but if you could please just, you know, think that I'm cool, and I really hope that you would take this on board. It's like, you know, we just assume that no one out there is interested.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true. There are a lot of people out there who really want to know. Give you a good story or illustration to that point. There was a lady by the name, and I talk about this in the book, but there's a lady by the name of Marina. And she was from Russia, and she had moved over to London for work. And she had grown up in the Russian Orthodox Church, really disillusioned by all of that religion and stuff.
For sure.
And so she came over to London, and she was living in London for a couple of years, and she really wanted to know, like, how she could be right with God. And so she would ask her coworkers. Nobody wanted to talk to her about it. She would talk to her friends. Nobody wanted to talk to her about it. She's just walking down the Bromley High Street one day, and she runs into our team with our red T-shirts on that says "No religion, just Jesus" on it. And they're talking to her, and they ask her, as we typically do, "Does this sound like something you would like to discuss further?" And she's like, "Yes." And so they hooked her up with my wife, and they had coffee. And my wife takes her to 1 Timothy and starts showing her how that she doesn't need a priest to be right with God, that there's no mediator between God and man except Christ Jesus, who gave himself for us. And Marina she just starts crying at the table. And she's like, all this time, I just wanted someone to tell me the truth about how I could be right with God. And nobody would talk about it with me. And so she got saved, and we baptized her a couple of weeks later. And she's still serving the Lord to this day, and still lives in London. She lives a little far away from us now because of her work, but she's still serving the Lord, and we love her to death. And but my question to everyone is, how long are the Marinas of the world going to have to wait before we'll just ask them? It's a reminder to us that there are people outside right now who will sit down and will listen to the gospel if you'll just ask them. If you just ask, would you like to talk about it? And so it's a reminder. But it's also it's an acronym. And these are like the guideposts that help us to navigate any conversation. And so it always starts with asking permission, and then you share the gospel, and then you try to keep the conversation going. And so it's not a script. It's not like a technique.
No, it's just a philosophy that's biblical.
It is. And it's, in fact, the way that you soul win right now, the way that you maybe present it, you can just drop that right in. You don't have to really change any of that. These are really guideposts that will help you to navigate any conversation you find yourself in. Because the way to start that conversation, I believe, is to just ask, is to ask someone instead of beating around the bush, instead of trying to build a bridge over the next 3 years that you're never going to cross. The best way to be bold without burning the bridge is to just ask them. And so, like, I'll ask people all the time. I say, "Hey, Jim," or whatever, and would you like to grab a cup of coffee with me sometime? I would love to open up the Bible and show you what it means to follow Jesus. Would you like to do that? And he's like, "No, I would not like to do that, Brian." I'm like, "Well, that's cool, man." I mean, I'm a jerk if I don't ask, and I'll still be friends with Jim, and we'll still hang out. But then I'll just go ask someone else. Now, whenever you ask someone that question, now I think personally that's the most polite way to be bold, is to simply ask their permission. Now, when you do ask somebody, and that's not easy to ask somebody, but if you can manage to ask somebody, 3 magical things happen when you do that. Number 1 is you find out where they stand. See, I know Jim's not interested, right? So I'm not going to I'm not going to spend the next 3 years building a bridge to Jim, because Jim's not interested. And trust me, from someone, and many people can attest to this, it is heartbreaking to build that bridge for a year and then find out that Jim's not interested. That is tough. So I know where Jim stands, but whenever I ask, he also knows where I stand. So if things go sideways in Jim's life, guess who he's going to come to?
He already knows where the truth exists, and he can come back to you.
And he knows that your faith is for real. And man, in a world where there is so much fake faith out there, it is a huge testimony when they do rub up against something that's real. So those are 2 things. Now, the third thing, and the most important thing that happens, is you've been obedient. And
you've won. Regardless of the outcome, you've already won.
You've already won.
And
that was one of the biggest lessons that we learned, was that our measure for success is obedience. We have no control over the results, All we can do is just be obedient to try to go out there and just make the attempt. That's all you have to do is just make the attempt. And if you get shot down, that's okay. Because here's another huge lesson we learned with this is that soul winning is always a win-win proposition. So if I go out there and I'm sharing the gospel with someone and they're like, yeah, man, I'll sit down with you and I'll have some coffee and we'll sit down and share the gospel with them. I'm like, that's awesome. I mean, that's amazing. And I love that. And we get to do that. And then I get to build a relationship on that, which, by the way, I think that's the way a relationship should be built. It should be built on the foundation of the gospel, not be built toward the gospel.
Meaningful relational terms set up front.
Yeah, man. Be honest with who you are. And it's so much more freeing, by the way. But you do that, and that's a huge win, right? And, of course, I get crowns in heaven because, you know, it's wonderful results, and so that's great. We all know that, especially if they get saved or there's a whole, you know, long list of what we might call results. But if any results were like, man, that's great, and I get rewards in heaven. And so everyone is aware of that. But also, if I go out and I'm sharing the gospel and I get shot down, and it reminds me of the very first time I ever tried to do this, an Orthodox Jew gave me the finger, right? And I'm telling you,
how'd that feel?
You have not lived until an Orthodox, I'm talking with the hat and the squiggles, right? I mean, you have not lived until an Orthodox Jew gives you the finger.
Man.
It was a wonderful experience.
Something similar would be like if a nun.
Yes.
That would maybe top it.
That might top it.
Yeah.
Yes. It was wonderful because, like, even if you get the finger, or God forbid, you know, your friend doesn't really like you anymore, right? Or whatever happens. I mean, worst case scenario, it gets violent. I mean, that's really rare.
Have you ever been punched? Sharing the gospel?
Well, I don't like to talk about those things too much because there's been a few times where, you know, my life was threatened, you know, and I've had people say things that they wanted to do to me that I can't repeat. And just, you know, lovely guys. Just lovely individuals, and it really made my day. But, you know, it happens.
Right.
But it's very rare. But even in a worst case scenario like that, the Bible tells us in Matthew 5 and Luke 6 that if you're persecuted for the gospel's sake, then you should be happy.
Yeah, big surprise.
Right. Happy are you, right?
Right.
You should take great joy and rejoice because why? Great are your rewards in heaven.
Yeah.
So I get, if they accept, I get rewards. If they
reject,
if they beat me to dust, I get rewards.
Win-win.
Or if they just don't like me anymore, I get rewards. Now, here is for me, was the eye-opening truth. The only way, when it comes to soul winning, the only way you can lose is if you don't do it. Now, then you really do lose. You lose rewards.
Yeah.
You lose your joy. You lose your purpose. The only way you can lose when it comes to soul winning is if you don't do it.
And you contribute to the death of the church.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a huge, you know, lesson that through a lot of trial and error and through a lot of messing it up and through a lot of fear and all the things you go through. Because when I first started, I just walked out onto the street and I had my Bible and there was no church and no T-shirts. And so I was just out there standing there, had no idea what I was doing. And I was scared out of my mind. I mean, I didn't even know the culture. I knew nothing. I was scared out of my mind.
Yeah.
And I did that for many years, trying to figure it out. And I talk a little bit about how God really rescued me and showed me, you know, how to do it. And I talk about that in the book. But that was a huge lesson that I learned, was that my measure for success is obedience. So if you just ask someone, you make the attempt and be like, hey, you know, Alice, let's grab some coffee, and I'd love to open up the Bible and show you what it means to follow Jesus. I promise you, starting today, if you just start asking people, it is only a matter of time before you're leading someone to Christ.
Right.
Because you will find someone who's interested, and that's one of our major rules. one of our major soul winning rules is that we are interested in those who are interested. So that's what I'm always doing. I'm always on the lookout for someone who's interested. That's the Holy Spirit's already working in them. And so I'm always on the lookout for someone who's interested. And if they're not interested, hey, that's fine. Because all that means is now I get to move on to someone who is. And now we spend so much time as Christians trying to convince people who are not interested. We really got to get over that.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, like, I'm curious what your thoughts are about the limitations that we set in general on evangelism. I think a lot of it has to do with the exhausting the pool or the pond in which we're fishing.
Yeah.
I think so many believers make excuses for their evangelism ministry because they've been fishing the same tiny pond for 10 or 15 years and they've gotten no results. And they're not willing to get outside of that limitation and go find other fishing holes or jump in the lake or the river and expand the amount of people that they encounter. And I think so much of this has to do with how vulnerable we will be with a larger audience of people. Something that happens, I think this happens in your 30s, is that you basically establish the world in which you want to live, and then you never leave that world. Like it's like there's a comfort. You've got your kids, you've got your job, you're making the money, you've got the retirement fund, you've got your church, you've got the pew that you sit in,
right?
And then you've basically insulated yourself, and you've expanded as far as you're going to expand, and then from that moment on, you're not really interested in meeting more people.
Right.
Like I don't need any more friends. I got all the friends I want.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah.
And so I think that's a danger of just the age and stage of life that someone enters into. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be intentional in breaking those restrictions.
Well, I think that if you are going to be a soul winner, then, one of the main things that we talk about in the book is that you have got to find a way. I mean, it seems very intuitive, but like if I'm going to go fishing with my friend, then obviously we're not going to sit in our living room. We're going to go to a fishing hole. We're going to go, and we want to go where the fish are biting. And so if you're going to be a soul winner, you have got to find some way. Now that's going to look different no matter, regardless of where you live.
Right.
That's going to look different. Now it's not going to look like it does in London. I found a high street, that's what you would call like Main Street.
Yeah.
And it's all pedestrianized. And so just a river of people, I just go stand in the river. And then I would try to, excuse me, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I just start talking to people. And, there's nothing sacrosanct about going on the street. It's good if that's what you need to do. For me, that's what I had to do, because in London, nobody talks to each other. So I had to go find a way that I could be continuously sowing seeds into the hearts of lost people. Now, that's the challenge.
Right.
If you want to be a soul winner, you've got to find some way that you can be, not as a one-off, you need to find a way that you can be continuously sowing seeds. And so that's what you're on the lookout for first. Is like, how can I do this? So, because if you want to lead people to Christ, this is a lifestyle. And you've got to find a way in your life that you can be continuously doing that. And so you can't really afford to be that sedentary. You can't.
Right. Yeah.
You can't afford to be that locked in. Now, I can appreciate the desire to be that, because to be honest, I'm a bit of an introvert, and a lot of people don't know that about me, but like I would rather stay in my office and read all day. And my wife went out of town one time. She left me at home, and she didn't leave me. I'm not saying she left me. I'm saying she just
temporarily.
Yeah, I was there and she wasn't.
Yeah.
And so she calls me like a day and a half later, and she's like, "Brian, have you left the house?" I'm like, "No." And,
are you eating?
She's like, "Are the curtains open?" No. She's like, "Brian, I want you to open the curtains and go outside. She has to tell
me.
Yeah,
you look like you haven't got a lot of sun.
Well, that's because there is no sun. Why do you think all those vampire movies happen in London, man? Because there's no sun over there. It's an entire population that is vitamin D deficient.
That's
right?
Too bad.
Yeah, we do not get a lot of sunlight.
Which it contributes to
But thank you for noticing.
The kind of, the fact that no one wants to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they need a little more sun.
Yeah, but that's why I think I fit there, because I don't want to talk to anyone either.
Yeah.
I've got...
And I think this is really interesting. So what you're saying is that I think the point that I'm gleaning from that is that there's degrees of confrontation, right? Mm-hmm. So if you live in a society or a culture where the people in the community are a little cordoned off relationally, then you have to interject yourself into their life in a way that's probably a little bit more firm and a little more confrontational than what they're used to. You have to break the mold. Yeah. A lot of us live in communities, especially if you live in the Midwest, where people are, want to know their neighbor, and they like chatting, they like small talk. Yeah. And so maybe the confrontation is a little less aggressive on paper, but there does need to be a form of confrontation. You can't indulge lifelong relationship with people for the sake of relationship alone. There has to, at some point, there has to be a willingness to speak up and say, hey, here's the deal. This is the answer to life.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. Just take a look at how many lifelong friends that Jesus had that were not in his circle. Mm-hmm. I think that's zero, and I'm not saying it's bad to have lifelong friends. I've got some great friends that are lost, but I'm saying, but that's not the goal.
Right.
And you're right. Like my daughter, Madison, she's a fantastic soul winner. It was heartbreaking when she went to university. She goes to university in Wales, and she's the best soul winner our church has.
Wow.
Myself included. Mm-hmm. She's a fantastic soul winner. It doesn't matter where she goes, man. She just falls backwards into a conversation with somebody. Mm-hmm. We were in Newark flying here, and it's like 10 o'clock, and these people, God bless them, the people of Newark, he needs to bless them, okay, because it was bad. And no one knew what was going on, and I'm just sitting there, and my wife is looking at me like, you have done this to me. Right? It's because of you that my life has brought me to Newark, right? And so we're like all frustrated. The kids are all tired. And I look over, and Madison is like, what are the things called? The terminals? Like not the terminal, the gates. She's like 3 gates over in a crowd of people that are waiting on their plane, and she's sitting talking to some lady. And I'm like, I'm such a loser. Yeah. This girl knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
And she will find a way to start talking to someone. And when they were younger, I proposed to them, what would you guys think about homeschooling? Because, the educational system there is top notch, but there's also a lot of things that they teach. And I just said, what would you guys think about that? And Madison was like, no. She's like, that's my mission field. Mm-hmm. How am I going to be able to share the gospel with lost people if I'm not around them all the time? But you see, the mindset drives where she ends up, because that's what she's on the lookout for that. So she ends up in conversations with people. But if we don't have that mindset, if we're not looking for that to be a soul winner, and you can do that. My son Stefan, he went and joined a jiu-jitsu club.
Yeah.
You can put yourself into areas where there's people, and but it's because they're thinking, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. Now he also loves jiu-jitsu,
right?
So he's not just making up something, but they will find themselves in crowds of people. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be a soul winner, I promise you will find yourself in crowds of people. You'll find yourself among people. And so that's really, as we start to learn these lessons, I tried to do my best to put this down into, the subtitle is hopefully going to be the Complete Soul Winner's Guide. Tried to put these down on paper so that you can, see, what that means to have this lifestyle as a fisher of men.
Yeah.
And what that looks like.
This other stuff that you mentioned was that it's important to have a right disposition What does that mean? What does it mean to have the right disposition of an evangelist?
Well, this is one of those things that we focus on. We have a whole section in the book. The book is divided into 3 sections, and this is like the middle section.
Okay.
Because this is something that's never really talked about with regards to soul winning, is the way that we carry ourselves as soul winners. And we kind of touched on this a little bit before, that we tend to carry ourselves as if nobody's interested, kind of everybody's against us, and nobody really wants what we have to offer. And I think that we forget who we are. I think that we forget what we have, and I think we forget who we serve.
Yeah.
And it really changes the way that we carry ourselves. And so a soul winner really should carry themselves like they have nothing to prove to anybody.
Right.
Because we really don't.
Let's take a moment right here to hear from Pastor Mike Renault of Living Faith Boston.
Hi, I'm Mike Renault, pastor at Living Faith in Boston, Massachusetts. And if you're considering learning the Word of God, Living Faith Bible Institute would be a good place for you. The good thing about LFBI is that you're not just learning from an academic standpoint. You're learning from actual practitioners that do in fact know the book. These are pastors and men who are leading churches, doing the work themselves, since they can give you a firsthand, real-life knowledge of what it means to learn the Bible in that context. Some of you may have a call in your life for the pastorate, to be a missionary, to serve the Lord in other parts of the world. Living Faith Bible Institute can prepare you in a way that you can be equipped with the Word of God and given practical tools, being held accountable in your ministry right where you're at. If you're interested in learning more or you want to enroll in LFBI, go to lfbi.org.
I always think that the Laodicean Christian either carries themselves as a hedonist or they carry themselves as a martyr.
Yeah.
They like to walk around like patting themselves on the back secretly and just, woe is me, dejected.
Yeah.
But really what you're suggesting is that the disposition of at least an active believer, someone who's at least functioning Philadelphian, is going to have joy and confidence in the way that they approach the work of evangelism.
It's true. And I think that Christians by and large are embarrassed. They're embarrassed of Jesus.
Yeah, it's too bad.
They're embarrassed of their faith, and they're insecure. And I don't mean as a person, but they're insecure within their faith. And there's just some major things that they've forgotten. And that's the reason why, we reek of desperation as Christians. We just appear desperate. And I don't know if you've ever tried to ask a chick out on a date, but when you reek of desperation, it is not attractive.
No,
it is not attractive. When you appear insecure and needy, and it's just not attractive to anybody. Right. And I'm not talking about employing, dark psychology to win people to Christ. I'm just saying that we come across desperate.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for us to be. And so what we do in the book is we take a look at how Jesus interacts with people, some very specific examples, and see the way that he carries himself. We look at how the apostles carried themselves. And obviously boldness is a huge part of their makeup. They have this boldness about them, like, I don't have anything to prove to you. But also that's coupled with, most importantly, with a meekness. This is a boldness, but it's not pride. It's not arrogance. That's the way boldness comes across a lot of times. It comes across as just being arrogant. It's not that. It's a boldness that's mixed with meekness.
Right.
And meekness is not weakness. Because for example, when you think of someone who's meek, you think of someone who is just timid, often maybe even a doormat. And that's not what meekness is. No. Because if you are meek, quote unquote, because you're afraid to confront people, well, then that's not a virtue. There's no virtue in that.
No.
But if you have real power as a person, right? Like if you know, that you know the answer and you know what you have, you know who you serve, and you know who you are as a believer, and you have real power as a person, and you know what you're worth, so to speak, in Christ. But then you take that and you use that as an opportunity to humble yourself and serve somebody. Now that's where the virtue's at. Mm-hmm. It's great power that has been brought under control in order to serve. Yeah. Now that's real meekness. So when you couple that with boldness, that is a powerful combination. Mm-hmm. Now that's really the way that we see Christ and his apostles carrying themselves, and that's something that we've lost in the arena with us, with the world. Yeah. And like when you see Christ, when that rich young ruler comes up to him, and he's like, he literally runs to him. When you compare the Gospels, he runs to him and kneels to him, right? And he's like, "Good master, what can I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus is like, "Why are you calling me good?" Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I don't understand. Why are you calling me good? Now, the way he reacts to him, I mean, he's bowed on a knee, asking him how to be saved. And the way he reacts to them is like, it's so shocking to me, right? I would love for someone on the high street to do that, right? That'd be wonderful. And I almost imagine in my mind one of the apostles being like, I think he's just being polite, but he's trying to explain to him, his first lesson to him is that obviously it's not wrong to call someone good. The Bible calls people good all the time. Mm-hmm. Even talking about human beings calls them good. Mm-hmm. But he's trying to say that my goodness with who I am does not fit within your definition of goodness. His first lesson is you don't really understand what it means to be good. Mm-hmm. And so he's immediately, because he loves him, I think as Luke says, when he looked upon him, he loved him, and he begins to teach him. Mm. When he loves him, he talks very straight to him, because what he sees in this guy, and this is what's so important as he's trying to interact with him, what he sees in, it looks like he wants to be saved, but what he sees is this guy doesn't really understand. Yeah. And we know that that's true because after Christ explains it to him, he doesn't want it anymore. Right. So we understand, he didn't understand what he was really asking. Now, if that would have been us in that interaction, we'd have that guy saved, baptized, and in the new members class by dinner, right? I mean, that day, he would have been in there. And then 5 years later, he's sleeping with his secretary, and we're like, man, what happened to that guy? Yeah. But he sees that this guy doesn't really understand. And so because he has this way about him, like he's not desperate for this guy to accept what he has to say. Yeah. We are so desperate for just to get a yes from somebody that we will do anything to get that, and he's not. And because of that, he's actually able to help him better. Mm-hmm. That's where this is not about being proud.
Yeah. You often hear, the sales term, close the deal, used. And I think we do this, we carry this over into every aspect. We'll be talking with a believer that's coming to our Bible study, and then we'll try to close the deal on discipleship. Yeah. And then we'll try to close the deal on, them being in our ministry. Right. And we're constantly using the world's methods in the church, which is why we're acting desperate. Because the two things aren't compatible.
They're not at all. You
can't use sales tactics or that way of understanding. This isn't a commission-based proposition.
It's actually exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. Our disposition, right? Our philosophy, our disposition should be that what we have is not for sale. Mm-hmm. That should be more our disposition. Yeah. Christ said, you don't cast your pearls before swine. Right. In other words, now this is the thing that's mind-blowing, is he says, you need to realize what you have in the gospel. And even as a soul winner, he's saying, and you don't just give it to anybody. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. That's what Jesus teaches his disciples. You don't just give this to just anybody. And that is a remarkable thing to try to wrap your head around. Right. That what we have is as costly as pearls. Now, when you throw pearls to swine, the point is it's not necessarily trying to call people swine.
Right.
The point of that is that they don't see the value in that. To them, they're wanting food. They don't see the value in pearls, right? And not only that, but whenever they see that it's of no value to them, then they turn on you, right?
Yeah.
So when you have someone that you're talking to, when they don't see the value in the gospel, then stop telling them it.
Yeah. It makes me think, what you're describing makes me think of Acts chapter 3 with Peter and John, with a certain man, silver and gold have I none.
Right.
It's like, what we have to offer is something very specific. And if that's not what you want, then that we're not in the business of just doling out feel good religion.
Right.
We're here for a purpose, and either you want that or you don't. And I think that's really important, is to understand what we have. What we have is very, very precious. It's very precious, and we have to be aware that if it's executed with cheapness, then we are not doing that person any justice, and we're certainly not doing the gospel any justice.
Yeah, we're not really representing it the way that it should be. Whenever I disciple someone, the very first place I take them is Acts chapter 4, and I show them the apostles when they're on trial, and they're standing there with the impotent man that they just healed.
Yeah.
And I love that.
It's such an amazing passage.
It is such an amazing
It's
passage.
a cost of discipleship passage.
Absolutely.
Really. Yeah.
And it's one of the passages we use in the book, one of the key passages that really demonstrates the boldness. Because here they are, because even the makeup of that Sanhedrin council would have been in a circle. So they're literally surrounded by these judges.
Yeah.
And so they're there, and you can just see it. You can literally, as you're reading it, you can smell it coming off of Peter. And John as well, because they even said they could see in them both. And it was remarkable that whenever they showed this boldness, it even says it in the passage, when they saw their boldness, it says that they recognized something in them. The actual language it uses means that they had seen this before.
Yeah, this is a character quality that we've seen once.
Yeah, and they said, and they realized they had been with Jesus.
Yeah.
And of course, they've got this man next to him whose life has just been changed as a result. And so they could say nothing to them. And so what I always teach my disciples as kind of an intro is I tell them, I say, now, first of all, have you been with Jesus? That's question number one. Question number two, can anyone tell that you've been with Jesus? And then question number three, are you an active soul winner because you've been with Jesus, right? Because obviously we can't heal people, but we can go out soul winning. That's the apples to apples for us in that passage, right? Are you actually soul winning because you've been with Jesus? Now, if the answer to those questions is yes, then you have nothing to prove to anybody. Because if you think about it, as you compare that passage to our lives, we are surrounded by people who are judging us all the time. And we as individuals, especially as Christians, we are constantly waiting for the verdict of how they're going to feel about us. What kind of judgment they're going to pass down as to whether they accept us or don't accept us. And we're surrounded by that all the time. And I tell them, I say, now, if the answer to those questions is yes, then you have nothing to prove to anyone.
No.
If the answer to those questions is no, then you have nothing to say to anyone. But that's where it starts. This kind of boldness comes because you've spent time with Jesus, and as a result, it becomes reflected off of you.
Yeah, you're not fishing for the acceptance of men. You're just simply trying to obey your friend and Savior.
And you can run that all the way through to Paul. I mean, you see the exact same thing. I'm not here to please men.
Yeah.
I'm here to please God. And so they have this kind of boldness and so what they end up doing in that court is they actually flip it around.
Yeah.
And Peter's like, actually, you guys are the ones who are on trial. Right. You guys are the ones who are in danger of judgment because of who you have crucified. And he turns that around on them. And later he even says, man, I mean, well, you guys tell me, should I obey God or should I obey you? And now this whole attitude that Peter has, that John has, even though John doesn't say anything, which tells you that it's nonverbal, because it says they see it in both Peter and John. And that's the way that we should carry ourselves. I was walking down the street, my Bible, my tracts, all that stuff. And
looking cool.
Yeah. And there's this man, he was a Persian man. He's standing over on the side, and he was like, hey, and I had my T-shirt on, and he says, if I asked you to give me some evidence for God's existence, what would you tell me? And I just looked at him. I said, I wouldn't tell you anything. I said, why would I waste my time convincing you of something you already know is true? And he just put his head down. And then I just kept walking, because I don't have anything to prove.
Yeah.
And I already know the Bible says in Romans chapter 1 that he already knows.
Yeah.
He not only does he know.
He asks because he knows.
He knows.
Fact. Yeah.
And he knows I know.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that carries over into my personal relationships. So we have to let go of that desperation. Take, for example, the time that Christ is with the Canaanite woman. That she comes up, she's crying, for her daughter. And the first thing that Jesus says to her is, he tells her to go away. This woman is crying because she wants help with her daughter.
Yeah.
And Jesus, no, I'm sorry. He doesn't tell her to go away. The first thing he does is he just doesn't answer her at all. He ignores her, right? And she's desperate. Please help me. Please help me. He completely ignores her. Even the disciples are like, should we send her away because she's like annoying us? The disciples just didn't get it, And so she finally gets through to him, and he says to her, why should I take the bread that is for the tribe of Israel and give it to dogs? And you're like, what?
Yeah.
What did you just say to this woman? And he says, why would I do that? Now, he's asking her on purpose. And she says to him, now, this is where the whole thing changes, because she says to him, she's like, I agree with you. I agree with you. She says, yeah, that's true. She says, but even the dogs get the crumbs from the master's table. Now, when she says that, Jesus completely changes. And he says, see, now you get it.
Yeah.
Now you get it. And he says, no, what you wanted, obviously, you have what you wanted because of your faith. And Jesus changed, gives her what she needs.
Right.
But what is he doing? He's trying to not only see if she's really interested in the truth, but also he's trying to help her understand what this is really about.
Yeah.
He's not looking for the quick yes here. He's not looking for the sale. He's not looking for someone just to agree with him or to validate him. He is trying to make sure that these people actually understand the truth about the gospel and what it is that he's trying to teach. And all of that was a test to see where her heart really was.
Yeah.
And we are so desperate, not necessarily for people to like Jesus, but for them to like us, that we're willing to let them slide on all of that if they will just accept us. And that is completely the wrong disposition as a soul winner.
Yeah, I always think about Samuel, and when the nation of Israel rejects the judges and they want a king. And Samuel takes that as a rejection of him. And God's like, it's not true. It's not about you. But when we do this thing where we associate our ego with the character and personage of Christ. So we do this in our evangelism too. We're actually not afraid of them rejecting Jesus.
Right.
That's not where the desperation lies.
Right.
We are desperate to be accepted as Christians. And if they receive Christ, then I am validated in my beliefs, and I've protected my ego. It's this kind of half-hearted work. I mean, we might be evangelizing, but we're doing it in a half-hearted, faithless way.
Yeah.
And we need to let go of all of those trappings.
Right. It
and
becomes
just say,
about us.
Yeah. Jesus is good to us. He's
Right.
our friend. Everyone should know him.
Yeah.
And if it's that simple, well, then it'll produce a disposition of boldness and meekness.
Yeah. But we live in a constant state of being so infatuated with the world that, well, just like the Hebrews class teaches, that Jesus is better. Jesus is better than what you left in the world. And we just don't believe that. We think the world is so much better. We're so in love with them.
Yeah.
We want to be like them so bad, and we want them to like us so bad. You know, I've talked to many pastors that are, as they're formulating their strategies and stuff, and they're like, man, we just want them to understand, you know, that we're just normal people that can have fun. And I'm like, why do you care if they think that? I mean, why? I mean, obviously you are normal people that can have fun, but that's not the issue. I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
But you are so desperate for them to accept you that you're willing to sacrifice so much just for them to give you the nod. And guess what? We are never going to get across the board validation from the world.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen.
I heard a pastor say once that we're just like any lost person. We're just like any lost person, except for we have the Spirit of God in us. And it was a way for him to downplay difference. And in my mind, I'm like, that's everything. That's the difference between saying they're human and I'm an alien from another planet.
Yeah, that's right.
We're exactly the same, except for the fact they're human beings and I'm alien from another planetary system. Like that's how different it is to have the Spirit of God in you. And so we need to stop appeasing the world. And if there is any desperation, it should be an urgency because the King's coming.
Yeah. Well, when you mix that, when you mix that kind of boldness with an authentic meekness, well, then when you carry yourself like you have nothing to prove to anybody, and you have this meekness that wants to take all of this power that's in Christ and who you are and use that as an opportunity to serve somebody, it becomes so much easier at that point to ask someone, you know, and to say, you know, when I ask people, I always say two words. I always say, I want to open up the Bible and I want to show you how to follow Jesus. I always say Bible and Jesus, because those are two words that usually shut the conversation down. Those are the two words that no one wants to hear. Have you ever tried to open up your Bible with your lost friend? You're like, let me just show you this verse. And I've had so many people just try to keep me from opening up the Bible in their presence.
What I've noticed is they look around like they're waiting on something to show up.
Yes.
They'll like look over their shoulder and they're like, he's doing
there's
this.
something else I've got to do, right?
Is anyone watching this happening? You know?
Right. And so I say those things on purpose. And because I throw up obstacles because I'm trying to see if they're interested. Because if they'll say yes, then I know that they're probably going to show up. And also I want to make sure that they know exactly what they're in for.
Sure.
And so it becomes so much easier to ask somebody because you're not desperate.
Yeah.
And you don't have to prove anything. And so you ask someone, hey, would you like to go sit down and...
Right. Now, I'd like to hear more about the approach. Tell us about the approach part of so it's, you know, we've got a right philosophy and we've got a right disposition. But what about the approach? What is it about the approach that we need to know? Yeah,
that leads you right into this approach, the Just A.S.K part, which is the last section. Because once you have your philosophy right, and that goes through a series of things of like the right why, like why you're doing it, the right approach, and the right question to ask, and all this kind of thing. We go through a whole philosophy in the beginning, then we focus on the disposition, and then that leads you finally to the approach. And people always want to jump to the approach. But without understanding the philosophy and the disposition, the approach is of not much use to you. It's only when you have the right mind and you have that disposition, then this approach will actually matter. Any approach will matter. But people always want to give me the script, tell me the technique, what are the 3 things I have to say? And it's like, that's not the point. But when you have those other things, then whatever approach you use will make a difference. And so then that leads nicely into this Just Ask approach. And so what we do is obviously, and we don't really have time to talk about it now, but the first person you should talk to as a soul winner is to God. You should have a life of prayer. You can start being a soul winner right now by just getting on your knees and praying. And we cannot, as I think it was Ian Bounds that said, we cannot talk to men about God before we talk to God about men.
Yeah.
And so we need to be bathed in prayer, and we need to be praying for open doors. But one of the real problems with praying is not just carnality, but passivity. Our prayers are passive prayers, and we need to not be passive praying people. So you need to pray for open doors, but you need to plan for open doors. The way that you find open doors is by knocking on a lot of closed ones.
Yeah.
So, and the way you do that is by asking.
Yeah.
Right? But what do? We say, Lord, please give me some open doors to share the gospel. And then we get up, we go to work, we come home, we eat our dinner, we watch Netflix, and we go to bed. And we do the same thing every day, but we're not actually looking for any open doors. And you see the exact opposite with the Apostle Paul. It says that when he was on his way to preach in Troas, he came upon an open door. It was in the process of going to preach that he found open doors. That's how you find them.
Yeah.
You have to go out and be asking. And so after you're prayed up and you're actively looking for open doors by asking people, then that's where this approach comes in. So you'll ask their permission. You ask them, hey, can I sit down with you? And they say yes or no. And then the main thing is you share the gospel with them. And it is so important that you share the gospel. And I wish, honestly, that we had an entire show just to talk about the S in the acronym, because this is the part where we blow it big time. We finally get to the place and we talk about everything but the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so there are really three parts that we have to cover when we share the gospel. One is the sinfulness of man, one is the salvation of God, and one is the Savior. And those are the three parts that we see in Timothy. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. And so we get three parts from that verse, really. And these are the three parts, no matter how you present it, just make sure that you cover that. You've got to cover sin. They've got to understand that they're a sinner. If they don't understand they're a sinner, they cannot get saved.
Right.
And then you have to explain salvation to them, and then you have to explain the Savior. Now, when you get to the cross, this is more the technical part of the gospel, where you're explaining how this salvation that he offers you is even possible through the cross. And then you explain all of that. And one of the most important things within this is bringing them to a decision. And I would encourage everyone who wants to be a soul winner, they must realize that once you're done explaining the cross, you're only halfway there. You're only halfway there. So we think that's the end. But in your presentation of the gospel, that's half. Like, for example, my wife took me mountain climbing one time in Wales. Worst thing I've ever done in my life, okay? It was awful. I discourage anyone from ever doing that. It's the worst thing you can do in your life. And so we were climbing this mountain. When I was going up, it was wonderful. I'm like, man, I am so thankful you're my wife, that you make me do these things, because look at this. It's just so great. And we get to the top, we take the picture. And then I turn around and realize I'm only halfway home.
Yeah.
I have to climb down. It took us 6 hours to get to the top. I have to climb down now to get home. It was awful, right? That pivot moment when I realized that I was only halfway. Now, that's what I want people to remember, that after they explain the resurrection and what Christ has done, that's the top, that's the mountaintop, okay? You still have to walk them all the way home.
Right.
That's only halfway. This is where we blow it so many times. You have to then lead them to that decision. That's why we call our church Crossroads, because you're all the time leading them to a crossroads where they have to make a decision of what to do. So you have to really prepare to present that to them, you know, helping them to understand what that means and how they, and you know, a sinner's prayer and all that stuff can be involved in that. So you share the gospel with them, and we go through all of that in detail in the book.
Right.
So you share the gospel with them, but then you have the letter K. And this is the part that really changed my life, was the letter K. And that was keep the conversation going. And this changed the way that I share Jesus forever. No matter where I go, no matter who I talk to, all I'm doing is I'm thinking, how can I get this to the next conversation? Because honestly, when I meet someone on the street, or if I meet someone in the supermarket, or a family member, it doesn't matter. When I ask them to follow Christ, the weight of that decision, that's like me asking them to marry me.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, for most people, that's going to require more than one conversation.
For sure.
Now, when I first started, I was so nervous and desperate that when someone finally let me talk to them, I would just throw Jesus up all over them. And then they would leave, and I was just like so relieved it was over, right? And then I never saw them again, right? But when I learned this piece, it really changed me. And it really helped me to slow down and relax in my gospel witness. So now when I'm talking to them, I'm not trying to have a conversation with them. I'm trying to have 10 conversations with them.
Right.
So like a great example is this guy named Jamal. I met him on the street, and we had coffee, and he was like, man, I love you, man. He didn't say I love you, man. I say that all the time, but he just said, you're a nice guy, Brian, but I don't believe this stuff. I'm an atheist. And I said, okay, do you want to meet again? And he was like, okay. So we met again at Starbucks. I bought him a coffee, and he was like, man, you're a nice guy and everything, but I just don't believe in this stuff. And I was like, all right, well, do you want to meet again? And he's like, okay. So like we got 4 coffees in before I even learned that he doesn't like coffee, right? I spent a ton of money on coffees. He doesn't drink coffee. And we just kept meeting. And eventually, he told me, he actually came to visit our church, and he told me later what happened. He was on a train platform. He says he's waiting on his train like all of us are doing constantly in London. And he said, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden it was like something came over me, and I realized that everything you had been telling me was exactly true.
Yeah. And
he texted me and he said, I'm ready to submit and join Jesus. He didn't even know how to say it. And he just texted me that.
That'll work.
Yeah. And I thought it was an amazing. Now, we know that was God that did that.
Yeah.
Salvation is of the Lord.
Right.
But practically, the reason why that happened is because we kept the conversation going, and we quit too easy. So I encourage people, when you're witnessing to someone, keep meeting with them until they either get saved or tell you to get lost.
Yeah.
Just keep the conversation going.
No, that's good.
Yeah. And so try to figure out when you're talking to people, stretch it out. Like say, like, how can I have 10 conversations with this person, not just one?
Yeah.
And okay, so the last thing I would say with regards to the approach is you're going to mess it up. If you're new to this, especially, when you're worried, you're going to go out there and you're going to be a soul winner. You're going to mess it up.
For sure.
You're going to say the wrong things. It's going to be horrible.
But the same way you mess up everything.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because your flesh is in the way and you're an idiot.
And that's like the best thing in the world, though. You've got, that's how you really learn the lessons that you can't read in the book, is by messing it up. We had this guy that came over. He was on a team, and he was like, just from a part of the U.S. that was very straight-laced, very conservative. He was a lovely guy, a little bit older than me, and but very conservative, right? So when we go on the streets of London, we run into all sorts of characters. So he's sharing the gospel with these guys on the street, and he's explaining to them how that no matter what you've done, you're not outside of God's reach. And this guy says to him, he says, well, that's because you don't know what I did this weekend. And the guy's like, what? And then he proceeds to explain to him in graphic detail what he did that weekend.
Yeah, his list of sins.
And this guy, he looks at him and he says this. Looks at him and he's like, yeah, that's pretty bad. I mean, when he told me that at dinner, we laughed. We laughed for an hour. I mean, and the guy, like, he's still stunned, and the guy starts walking off, and he's like, no, wait. But it was like too late. And it was just you're going to blow it.
Yeah. You're
going to say the wrong things. You're not going to know how to do it. But that's part of the deal. And you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. So my encouragement to everyone is to go out and break some eggs.
Yeah.
Go out and make a mess of it, and figure it out as you go. And but my hope and my prayer is that the lessons that have been hard learned through many years of trial and error will help equip people, anybody, regardless of who they are, to be able to go out and be a soul winner today. And the last thing I would say about this is that when you are a soul winner, as I've said before, 100% success is guaranteed.
Yeah.
If you are going to be a biblical soul winner, 100% success is guaranteed, and this book will show you how to do that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited about the book. I'm hoping it's available this fall of 2023.
Yeah.
You're going to take it on tour with you.
Yeah.
And share that with people. That's
really my hope, is as I go to say thank you, I want to show them, like, besides planting a church, these lessons that have been learned, I want to be able to share those as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, we're thankful that you're here, that you're hanging out. We're thankful for this content. We're thankful for your investment in us and how you're training us all. I mean, God's using you to train us all to be more intentional in our evangelism, and so that's a wonderful thing. We're grateful for you, man.
Well, I you know how I feel about you, man. I love you to pieces, and man, I'm burdened by this, and I know we have a great time, and we'd love to laugh and stuff, but this stuff really burdens me because I really want to see people become soul winners, and statistics tell us that the vast majority of Christians out there will never share their faith with anybody. And the truth is, the honest truth is that most Christians want to share their faith. Most Christians that I come in contact with, they want to share their faith.
Yeah.
But they just don't know how. And so I hope that we can, in some small way, help to remedy that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking to us about it today, and we're going to really promote the book, and hopefully we can see some people get on fire for this work in their lives. So thanks,
love you,
Brian.
man.
Love you too, dude.
Yeah.
And we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of the Postscript with Pastor Brian Clark. Keep him and his family in your prayers over the coming months, because they're going to be traveling a lot, but they're also going to be preparing to go plant another church in London, and that's no easy task. And so, he didn't say it, but I'm going to say it. He needs your prayer, and he needs your support, your financial support. And so if you've got questions about how you can get behind them in that work, please reach out to LFBI, and we'll make sure that you get connected. But if you have a burden for London, and after hearing Brian, you have a heart for his work and his family, we want to connect you with him and that. But we also want to connect you to LFBI. And we want to connect you to the resources that are going to train you to be the minister that you need to be. We want to see every member of every church a minister of the gospel. And so that might require you learning the Word of God better. That might require you growing more closely in your understanding to the Bible and what it teaches, what it says, knowing the character of God. So come join us in Living Faith Bible Institute and learn how to study the Bible for yourself and be empowered to have a relationship with the Lord that will fuel every aspect of your life. So if you visit lfbi.org, you can learn about our statement of faith, our program of study, $40 a credit hour. We try to keep it really cheap because we want people to get access to this content, and we want to come alongside you and your local church as you grow in your discipleship. But we love you, and we're grateful for the time that you've spent with us today talking about evangelism. Go share the gospel with someone today and do it with boldness, without fear, knowing that the Lord loves to see you be a soul winner. And so we love you, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of The Postscript. God bless. Thanks for listening to The Postscript. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and review in order to help other people find our podcast. If you value this show, please help us continue creating content by supporting Living Faith Bible Institute at lfbi.org/support.